there we go. So the next presentation tonight, we'll be talking about conflict resolution. So how we go about preserving our relationships with folks when things go wrong. I'm going to switch it over to Michael to do just that quick introduction to Pull Everywhere before we start diving in.
Right, so I think we have a couple of people join us, so I'm just going to run through this quickly again. If you are using Zoom on your computer, you might find it easiest to access this platform using your phone or tablet. We're going to go through some instructions. So again, we're going to be using this platform to get feedback from you throughout the presentation tonight. So if you could please open up a new page on your web browser and go to the URL pollev.com/COF community. That link should be in the chat box shortly, if not already, and you can just click on that. If you would prefer to text in your responses, just using text message, go ahead and draft a text to the number 22333 and send the word COF community to that number. So we are going to, just to test this out, in a single word, what is your favorite springtime activity? So again, if you are using your text message, just text the word COF community to 22333. You should get a message back saying that you're ready to go, and then you can just text in a single word. If you're using the web browser, you can go ahead and just enter it into the text box there. So let's go ahead and see these responses. Whoops. Gardening, walking, longboarding, cruising, COF community, smelling dogs. Oh God, I thought smelling and dogs were right next to each other. I thought that was one word. Hammocking, great one. Gardening, awesome. Golfing. I've always wanted to learn how to golf, but I tried to do it on the little putt-putt course and just was a disaster. So I don't think I can be trusted around an actual 9-iron. Awesome. All right. Looks like we got some good responses, and I especially like our little emoji. Cool. So now that we have most of those responses in, whoops, what is that? We're gonna ask a couple, oh, sorry. Welcome to our presenters, Trifina Clark, Community Engagement Officer from the Ruth Mott Foundation, and of course, Ashley Everhart, Executive Director of the Neighborhood Engagement Hub. Sorry, I screwed up the order of this. So we're gonna ask a couple questions before and after the meeting. Again, just to get a sense of how effective the content was. So the first question we're gonna ask is, I feel like I have the skills to effectively deal with conflict. If you definitely agree that you feel like you have the skills, that it's gonna be letter A. If you mostly agree, that's letter B. If you're not sure, that's letter C. Mostly not, letter D. And if you definitely do not feel like you have the skills to effectively deal with conflict, go ahead and enter the letter E. Let's go ahead and see these. All right, we're again skewing to yes, but definitely mixed yes to not sure. Good to know. Just gonna give it another second for these to roll in. All right, we'll call that good. Our next pre-meeting question is, how do you view conflict? Do you think that conflict is good? Hit letter A. If you think that it is neither good nor bad, hit letter B. And if you think it is bad, hit letter C. And let's go ahead and view. Oops. All right. So most folks saying neither good nor bad, but some split on that as well. And then we're going to ask one final question here. And again, this question is going to stay open, meaning that at the end of the workshop, or throughout the workshop, sorry, you will still be able to text in or submit replies to it, and we'll revisit those again at the end of the presentation. So let's go ahead and see here. Oh, and sorry, I should have said, try to make a one word response if possible. Sorry about that. But we're seeing, yeah, confusion, resolution, listening, differences. Wow. I feel that. When there's conflict going around me, I just sort of, wow. All right, so like I said, we're gonna leave this open, but I will throw it over to Trifina, and Trifina, I'm so sorry, I'm gonna bring back those two slides that I skipped over. Whoops.
Yeah, we're actually gonna start with Ashley.
Sorry.
It is all good. Ooh, I like ouch came out with what is what's the first word that comes up? Somebody said ouch. So yeah, well, Michael's working on pulling that up. As Michael had shared before we got into the poll everywhere questions, this presentation will be put on by myself and Trifina Clark. So Trifina Clark is a community engagement officer with the Rosemont Foundation, and I am Ashley Everhart, the agency director. The executive director of the Neighborhood Engagement Hub. Yeah, lots of really great words there. So today's session objectives are to talk about how we identify and understand conflict. You know, what exactly is the definition of conflict, and what does that mean to how we can then understand what a conflict is and how we work through it. We're also going to spend some time identifying the factors that lead to conflict. So, you know, why is it that we find ourselves in a situation where we're having a conflict with another group or with another individual? And then we'll talk through in breakout sessions some resolution strategies for conflict. So, and get the opportunity to practice some of those resolution strategies. So what is conflict? Merriam-Webster describes conflict as an extended struggle or battle, a clashing, disagreement. The Cambridge Dictionary describes it as an active disagreement. So, you know, something that is currently in play between people with opposing opinions or principles. That characterization really kind of has some negative connotations, right? So is conflict good or bad? You know, little is attained without some constructive management of conflict. Conflict could potentially give us opportunities to challenge our own way of thinking. But we often think about conflict as a negative. We think about it as relationships are breaking down, or productivity in a conversation decreases. Sometimes we think about conflict being a space where decision making slows down or comes to a halt altogether. But again, you know, conflict really could be an opportunity to increase our creativity and think outside of the box to find an alternative solution that works for everybody, or an opportunity to test our understanding of things, or to think of some new opportunities.
And I would just add to this too, you know, when we again, 69% of you said that is neither good or neither good or bad. And so that was great. That, you know, because as you can see here, it can have both negative and positive results. And so if you don't already, I want to challenge you to kind of think about conflict as an outgrowth of diversity that is characterized by our thoughts, our attitudes, our beliefs, perceptions, and our social systems and structures. And so to give you an example, you know, at some point, you know, long ago, government felt like faith-based organizations did not need to receive funding to do community work or to provide services to the community. So it was hard for them to attain grants or secure grants to do work. And then over the years, people's attitude and perspective about tapping into churches and other faith-based organizations to help with community building, community development, and also getting information out to the community changed. We can see that example just now, like even with COVID or the water crisis. We depended a lot on our churches and our faith-based organizations because they were trusted sources in the community that people went to and relied on for information to either to the water distribution sites or testing sites for COVID. And so that's an example of how changes in attitude or perception over time. And that happens with us too, as we interact with people and through our lived experiences, we may believe or feel one way at one period in our lives, and then that will change over time. And so we want to challenge you today to take a new view of conflict. And so even when we look at the definitions of conflict, there was a lot of negative words that was included in that. And sometimes because when we encounter conflict, we automatically relate that to a negative experience or feeling of discomfort or like emotional or hurt. And so I'm not going to read through each bullet on this slide, and we'll just highlight one the next slide, but really being able to begin to think about how do you currently view conflict and how can we perceive it differently moving to the future. Because again, we all know that when we're doing community work or when we're working with people, period, working together is not easy. And not two people are alike. And so as many times we see, especially with organizations or even with neighborhood groups, a lot of times we're competing for the same resources. And that in and of itself creates conflict or causes conflict. And so, that's one example. There's always miscommunication, as well as we're working together, we can have misconceptions about people or individuals, organizations. And that brings a disruption to order. And anytime order is disrupted, we feel discomfort or uncomfortable, and it creates that negative experience that we just mentioned earlier. And so as we look at the next slide, where we're going to talk about just two of these points. And so we want to move from perceiving conflict as always a battle between incompatible self-interest and desires to just one part of our relationship. And so, a lot of people, when you think about conflict and early on, they normally talk about like strategies to conflict. And we always hear about some people use avoidance. Some people may be competing for just to make sure that they win or compromising. And all of those can be good strategies. But when you're talking about how do you build relationships, sometimes those are not the most effective way to deal with being able to handle conflict for long-term and future growth in relationships. And so we're gonna dive a little bit deeper, but again, it's just one part of a relationship, and the parts involve our needs, our values, perceptions, power, goals, feelings, and so on. And so when we talk about the ingredients for conflict, those are the main ingredients as well. Because again, as we look at our values, people values change over time. Our feelings about different things and different situations may change over time. And so when we look at it as far as those diversities that everybody brings to the table, we have to be open and willing to be able to hear and work through our issues. And so with this 8 steps of resolving conflict, you guys received a handout in your packet that was the conflict pathways, partnership pathways. And so this is, again, especially if you're trying to strengthen your relationships, we want to kind of go through these steps that you have in that handout. I also want to just kind of get people to thinking as we walk through or talk through each one of these steps, because we're going to have a breakout session. And in the breakout session, we ask you to kind of think about a conflict that you experienced in your past. And as we talk through each step, kind of identify a way that, or think about how you handled it in a way that you may have been, you may be able to improve a situation in the future if you consider one or two of these steps and how you could have changed your behavior, your attitude, or how you handled the situation. And so again, just kind of visualize that conflict that you had that you want to kind of assess as we walk through these different steps here. And so also I want to mention there was another, in your email you received another 2-pager. You may not have it right now because I'm going to share a lot of content. In each one of these steps we can go into more in depth, but we don't have the time here. And so that handout will be a summary of it if you don't have paper and pencil to take notes. And then also we're going to do the survey at the end. And if you feel like we need to dive a little bit deeper in any of these, please put on your survey that this is something, another session that you would like to have sometime throughout this year instead of waiting to next year to kind of talk about it. And so as we get ready to walk through these steps out, when we're dealing with conflict, we need to consider 3 things. 1, really clarifying our understanding of each other and the relationship. And be open to considering ideas and possibilities that you may not have thought about otherwise. And then also see if there are aspects of our relationships on which we can build effective and improve those relationships. And so again, we talked about even how you facilitate meetings and who's in the room. And so you need to know, you think about, the people that you are working with in the community. You know how they respond. We even talked about the generational differences and the things that's needed. And so all of that comes into play when a conflict arises. It may just be that people are getting frustrated because we're not giving them what they need. We're not understanding what they're communicating to us. And so we need to really be able to clarify those perceptions. And so the first step is talking about creating an effective atmosphere. And so a lot of times when a conflict arises, we want to solve the conflict right then. Like, let's deal with it now so we can handle it. And a lot of times that's not the best way to get into a conflict resolution conversation. Because people need time to cool down. People need time to walk away and process what's been happening over a period of time that has gotten you guys to this particular situation or circumstance where now you're facing conflict with each other. And then you also want to just prepare yourself. So again, as you take time to just process, prepare yourself on how do you want to address the other individual or group. How can you create a environment or an atmosphere that's that's established partnerships and not like a one-on-one battle. Because you don't want to battle if you're trying to come to some kind of consensus or agreement on how you can move forward. And so clarifying those perceptions. Perceptions are the lenses through which we see ourselves, others, and our relationships, and the situations we encounter. For effective conflict resolution to occur, you will need to work with the other people that's involved in the conflict to clarify those perceptions. And we just can't assume that the way that we see things is the correct way. Because again, we always say people's perceptions are their realities. And so you may see things one way, and from my angle, it's totally different, or how you acted or responded, or what you did and what you did not do. And so we need to make sure that those things are clarified, so I know where, or where the other person is coming from, and they also understand how you see the situation. Step 3 is focus on those individual and shared needs. And so these are the things that you must have in order for the relationship to work. Sometimes we have desires that we will identify as needs, but is not necessarily a need. And so really being able to communicate your needs, your personal needs, your partner's needs, the relationship needs, and then those shared needs. And a lot of times as you begin to share what your needs are, your partner will see that there's some of the similar to what the things that they need as well. So clear communication, you to be accountable for what you say you're going to do. You to follow up with people when you say that you're going to follow up. Like whatever has caused that conflict, you guys can be clear with what my needs are and how you can best help me to work through this relationship. Step 4 is build that shared power. And so we know that power dynamics always come into play with any relationship, whether it's a mother-daughter relationship, a boss to a coworker. But when you're dealing with residents in the community, you still have those roles. People may have titles or positions, and you don't want to, you they may try to use their power or their authority to be able to make you comply. And so we need to, when we're working with each other, we need to remove our roles and our titles and look at people as individuals that have needs and wants, and they need to be treated as a person, you know, with dignity. And so when I say that, let me go back up to one I forgot. Like when we're creating that atmosphere, it's just really important that you pick a neutral location. Because again, like I talked about, a parent and a child or a boss with their employees, if you call them in the office, that person may automatically feel intimidated. And so the same thing with you're doing work in the community. If I have you come to my house, I might feel like I got one up on you because this is my environment. I'm used to it. I can act like I want to. But if I come to your space, you might feel like you have one up on me. So where can we go that's a neutral place that everybody feel comfortable to share their ideas or share their issues or share their concerns? And so that's really important as you create the environment, but also as you begin to identify those shared needs or individual needs, and you're building that collective power. And so we don't want to use negative power to attempt to always take from the other person to increase our advantage. But we do want to use positive power to build up on the constructive capabilities of all parties included in the conflict. And so shared power is the energy that will also make the relationship more effective, as well as the conflict resolution successful. So again, we want to, try to build that shared power with each other. Step 5 is deal with the past. On your handout, it says looking to the future, then learning from the past. And so when we talk about that, we know as individuals, our past lives, our past experiences influence everything that we do, including our relationships and the conflicts within those relationships. And so there's 3 major steps that we need to think about or consider when we're trying to look towards the future. The first one is focus on what you can do now and tomorrow, no matter what has occurred in the past. We need to understand the part that the past events have played in creating this particular conflict that we're currently facing. We need to develop and use skills that can help us learn from the past so that the way you deal with conflict will improve in the future. Because again, if we keep on making the same mistakes, we talked about having that ideal of a conflict that you experienced in the past and maybe it went well when you tried to resolve it and maybe it did not. But what happened that made it go wrong that you could have learned from and improved on the next time that you found yourself in a similar situation? So step 6 is generating options, and they kind of covered that again when you talk about group facilitation and being able, whether it's a consensus or the way that you run your meetings, if you allow people to be able to be open with sharing, it may generate a lot more options than you would have initially thought was available to you. And so when you generate options, it provides choices from which specific steps to resolve conflict, and it can improve the relationship because you guys can agree upon how you want to move forward. So generating options includes several tasks. Again, we want to trace the conflict back to a time before it was at the level that it's currently at now, and then ask ourselves, what was our options that we may have not explored before the level of conflict increased. We also want to spend some time envisioning new possibilities, as well as when we talk about preparing ourselves, you can come already prepared because you have worked with these individuals before. And so you have some idea of some of the shared needs that you guys share. And in case you need a starting point, you can just have that list together already and say, well, this is my personal need, but I know we share these common needs, and you can use those as a starting point, knowing that they may change as the person begins to share and just share their perspective, as well as how they feel or what they think they feel they need moving forward. Step 7, develop doables. And so these are stepping stones to action. So they have to be concrete actions, which takes you step forwards to resolving that conflict. The doables are critical steps used to build trust while we're working together. Doables should include you guys be able to, things that you know you have a good chance of accomplishing. They don't favor one person over the other. It requires both parties to participate in identifying what are doable for the group. And it meets at least one of the individual needs as well as the shared needs. And then it used that positive power that we talked about for the conflict partnership, as well as, again, it's things that you can do right now to move forward and improve your relationship. And so the last step is make mutual benefit agreements. And so we talked about those partners, those meeting agreements. And so again, after you go through all these steps, and I forgot to mention that sometimes we may have to, they're not linear. So sometimes you may have to convert back to one step, especially the power one, when you're working through this, because again, you want to make sure that you're in a good space to move forward and that you guys can agree upon what are the shared needs and what are things that we can accomplish now. Some things you may have to, that might be a little bit more challenging. You may have to postpone to kind of work out, but work on the things that you can, identify, like what order you can really work through it so that you can begin to have some positive forward movement. But those mutual beneficial agreements must be realistic and effective enough to survive the challenges of the future. Because again, miscommunications happen, conceptions of each other will come up again. Whatever it is, you're going to encounter conflict in the future. And so however you handle this and whatever agreement you come up with, it has to be able to withstand the time, stand of time, sorry. And so again, you must be able to build on clear perceptions of the conflict, who's involved in the conflict, and specific steps each partner has agreed to take to improve the relationship. And this will allow you to resolve the problem, and it also will benefit both parties. And so, again, just walking through those strategies at this time, we're going to get ready to break out in the activities or the breakout groups. And so the next slide will, again, just share the discussion points with you. Again, hopefully you have already identified a conflict that you experienced. And based on the steps that we just walked through, what is something that you could have done differently that could have helped you to improve that relationship, to identify other options or opportunities to really enhance the work that you're doing and you're accomplishing in the community, as well as your relationship with the other parties. So Teresa, you could break us into groups at this time. Does anyone would like to share out either the types of conflicts that their groups have experienced and one or two things that they felt that they could have done better, or that they may not have used these steps to address, that they feel like one of the steps could have been beneficial if they worked through it the way that we explained it.
Yeah, I can go first. So my group talked about a situation in which one of the members was working at a desk with a irate individual who was screaming and yelling and not wanting to pay her water bill in the height of the water crisis. And this was at city council or city hall, or it was a government building. And one of the things that we talked about was how the individual may have perceived our group member as basically a figure of authority or power because they were a government employee. And one of the things that we discussed was, coming to a mutual understanding with the person so that they didn't necessarily feel like they were on the outside, but that you understood where they were coming from and were able to relate and thus help relieve some of that conflict that way.
Thank you, Lauren. Would another group like to share?
Well, I would like to put Eartha on the spot. She was just describing an issue with a former group member that sounded pretty, difficult to come to a resolution. Eartha, I don't know, or either Eartha or Daisy, if you would want to talk about that.
And this is Teresa for those of you who may be on the spot a little bit. We are back to recording, so don't, just be careful about how you say things potentially. I don't know how those private conversations went, so.
Okay, well, mine was total disrespect for I have a strong personality and I already know that, but I respect others. So total disrespect for myself and bringing my religious background. And that really pushed the button where I stood my ground at that time. And what I should have done was just walked away and not indulged in it. And then came back later on to try and work things out because it heated up the whole meeting and it wasn't productive for anyone in that meeting that day. And so trying to create a effective atmosphere to work in, that wasn't happening that day. And I fed into it and I shouldn't have. I should have carried myself in a better manner than I did.
Yeah, and I think that part of that too, Eartha, goes back to that first presentation where we talked about establishing group rules up front. So, one of the things that we've talked about and that is included as one of the examples that could be shared as a group rule is not to make things personal, right? Like it's not appropriate in a neighborhood meeting to make things personal.
Right.
It is our it's the neighborhood that you live in. It's where your home is. It's where your kids grew up. It's it's personal in those kinds of ways. But when you come to a meeting and attack somebody, that's not fair. So establishing those group ground rules in the beginning so that the group has something that they can back you up with and say, look, like we understand that you might feel a different kind of way about this issue, but we've agreed that we're not to make these issues personal. We're going to talk about the business of the neighborhood organization and not attack individuals.
Yeah, that's right.
And then I'll share from my group, and anyone feel free to add to it. And so a few types of conflict they identified was like decision making, and just really trying to be open to listening to each member and why they have made certain they feel a certain way about a thing or about a location of a project or how we should do things, and try to understand their viewpoint. And it just goes back to generating options. Because again, you don't want to be closed-minded. As a leader, you don't want to already come with the solution or the way that we're going to do things, but just really being open to hearing from your group so that they can help identify the best way or the best approach to go about community work. Another one was just getting people to follow through on their promises. And so a lot of times that's just frustrating in and of itself because a lot of the responsibility end up falling to the responsible people. And then you just get tired of just working with people and just say, hey, I want to do it myself. And we know that we can't get a lot done just by ourselves. So we need people to work together. And our group members identified just really exploring the reasons why people don't show up, when they say they're going to do something, and being able to, whether it's clarify perceptions, or they thought it was, I can just do it whenever. I told you that time, but I didn't think I was stuck to it. Like, why didn't they show up, and how can we make sure that it won't happen in the future? So really being able to discuss those reasons why without really being put off by it or refusing to work with them in the future, especially if we need more people to help volunteer to make change happen in that community. And then we started also talking about just again with organizations, when they have certain rules that we feel that they're unfair, and they're really, they don't want to hear why we feel they're unfair. And so we started the conversation about, okay, if we're working with people in community and it's just more than me that has that same concern, how can we build collective positive power to be able to speak to those organization leadership in those organizations, to tell them how we feel about it and why we feel it's wrong, to kind of push them to evaluate how they do things, to make changes to those policies. So that's for us. Anyone else would like to share at this time?
I would like to share. This is Shirlette. The one thing you can do to remember, because I'm a therapist, and when you're dealing with irate people and to try to figure out how not to make it personal, is just remember that people bring their past experience into different environments. So with that, you have to recall it's not really about you. It's like they bring past experiences and how they dealt with something before, how something happened before. And if you keep that in the back of your mind, their response to you may not necessarily be personal to them. It's just some kind of experience that they've had in the past and they can't seem to let it go. So that's one of the things you can definitely do to keep yourself on track. This is not about me. They had some experience maybe in the past, and that has guided their behavior today.
And Michael, if you could bring up that question and answer slide for us. And so when Michael bring up the slide, I'm just going to read a quote to everybody. And the quote says, whenever you're in conflict with someone, there is one factor that can make the difference between damaging the relationship and deepening it, and that is the attitude. And so the attitude that we bring to the table when we're trying to approach the person, to let them know that you have issues with them, their behavior, how they treat you, or how they're going about not following through with work that you guys agreed that will get done. And so we have to really, again, when we approach the other person, group, or party, think about how can we create that effective atmosphere that's not you versus me, like as in a battle, but that we really want to work through this issue so that we can be able to function together and move forward and strengthen our relationship. And again, sometimes I'm going to be honest. Sometimes every relationship may not be worth saving because, again, we might have grown. We start, as you grow, your values change, and the person may not honor your values, or they're just not a reliable partner. And so in those situations, this process may not be worth even taking the time to go through. But if it's a relationship that you really value and that you know that you need in the future to get the things done that you would like to accomplish in your community or even in your organization, it's worth taking some time to really kind of walk with the individual together to identify ways that you both can agree on to move forward. And so at this time, you have our contact information if you would like to reach out to us. Your slides also included references. There's a good book that goes a lot more in depth with each one of those steps. The 8 essential steps for conflict resolution, preserving relationships at work, home, and in the community. And then, and at this time, we're just going to do our post-survey questions.
I have a question. I know there's times when you have goals that people just don't follow through with. How can you, during the group, when you start to establish who's going to do what, help people identify their strengths and weaknesses and what jobs to sign up for. So you don't have that, hopefully it can have a reduction in the amount of work not being completed.
So Ashley or Michael, you want to take that on as you're dealing about as far as goal setting and group setting? Or with group?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that I focus on when I'm working with groups and developing action plans is thinking through like different kinds of roles in any given action. So let's just say I'm planning a surprise party for Trofina's birthday. I might take the lead on doing the actual planning and doing the coordination, but I'm gonna reach out to Michael. Michael's gonna support me with getting the food, and Teresa's gonna get the party supplies, and Edna's gonna make the cake. But at the end of the day, so it's about division of labor. At the end of the day, I'm taking the lead on planning the party, so that means that I need to reach out to Michael and Teresa and Edna on a somewhat regular basis to make sure that the party gets planned. And then, you know, Michael is responsible for the food, and Edna's responsible for the cake, and Teresa's responsible for the supplies. So making sure that you always have somebody that's taking on the leadership role of making sure that they're coordinating all of those activities, and then allowing that person to delegate responsibility so that they have support in making it go. I think one of the other things that's really critical in any project that you're working on is making sure that you build a relationship with the people who are supporting you in the development of that project or in the coordination of that event. Because the more trust and relationship that you have with people, the more willing somebody's going to be to come to you and say, I'm so sorry, I know I'm going to drop the ball on this, or I know that I am dropping the ball on this because this other thing came up that I wasn't expecting. So with Neighbors Changing Flint, I had to come to the planning team and say, I'm sorry, my son's daycare, his classroom's been closed for quarantine because one of his daycare teachers tested positive for COVID. So I know that my schedule is going to be bananas. Can you help me out? And so having that trust and that relationship also makes it more likely that somebody is willing to recognize their own limitations in their schedule as things change. Michael, do you have any other thoughts? Anything else that I didn't cover?
No, I think that was pretty comprehensive. The one thing I would add is I think, you know, when we think about accountability, you know, if you're delegating, you are delegating some amount of accountability, right? Like you're taking that off of yourself and putting it on somebody else. And I think that that's where those relationships really become really key, is to keep accountability for other people, you know, so that, yeah, just like Ashley was saying, sorry, I'm just restating your point, Ashley. Thank you.
I wanted to just kind of add to that. If you are starting to find that list is getting really long and you're like, I delegated, I don't know why it's all coming back to me still. You can even come up with like kind of team leads on specific tasks. So if you know you've asked 4 different people to take care of getting the word out, you might ask one of those 4 people to be like the main person that you go to and kind of say, okay, how's it going with your team? Have you been able to get everything out? So just continuing, you know, if your workload gets bigger and bigger, you might want to start delegating in a little more complex way. But that's just another way to kind of get people to help you out.
Great, thank you.
No, and then the last thing I would add, you know, as you work with people, you begin to identify their strengths or their areas that they are really good in. And so being able to begin to identify that, and as you identify tasks, being able to kind of ask them if they want to do it, instead of someone that you know that they never follow through or finish stuff or is not done to your expectations after you have communicated what the expectations are. Being able to kind of allocate things accordingly based on what you begin to see from your volunteers or your staff or whatever. And staff is different because you're paying them to do a job, so you expect them to do it. But with volunteers, just really being able to find their sweet spot and the things that they're really good at, that they can do sometimes with their eyes closed because they're just so passionate about it. So observation as well as helpful.
Thank you, Jafina. Appreciate that. Thank you, everyone. Teresa and Michael, thank you.
Thank you for the question. I think, Michael, are you walking us through the remainder here?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut anybody off. If Trifina, you're good for the post questions. Okay.
Yeah.
Checking.
Yep.
Yeah, I think you guys are all good.
Cool. So same questions as before the presentation. Again, we're just trying to get a sense of how effective this was. So if you definitely feel like you have the skills to effectively deal with conflict, go ahead and select the letter A or text A to the number right at the top of the screen. If you mostly agree, that is letter B, not sure, C, mostly not, D. And if you definitely do not feel like you have the skills to effectively deal with conflict, go ahead and select the letter E. Let's go ahead and see here. All right, so we definitely moved up. I think we had about a third of folks saying not sure before, so we definitely made some good improvement there. Let's give it another second here. All right, then oh, there we go. All right, 7822, nice. Let's go ahead and move on to our next question. How do you view conflict? If you think conflict is good, that is letter A. If you think it's neither good nor bad, that is letter B. And if you think it is bad, flat out, that is letter C. Let's go ahead and pull up our responses. All right. Still a little bit of a mix. Yeah, it's all about, I think this is a little bit more of a subjective thing where, you know, it can be good, it can be bad, it can be neither, you know, it all depends on your frame of reference. Awesome. And then we are going to ask again, what is the first word that comes to your mind when I say the word conflict? Again, it's helpful if you text this in as a single word response. But given what we have just been discussing, is there anything else that you can think of or that you do think of when you hear that word? Let's go ahead and see our responses. Resolution. All right. Ouch. Opportunity. I think that's a new one. Challenge and resolution. Solution. Nice. And then let's just see if we get any more. We are going to take a look at our last one here. Also, ouch. We have bully, annoying, disrespect, and then in our current one, we have opportunity, we have communication, we have resolution, we have challenge. So I think that shows a little bit of a change in our frames of references.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. Before we take it out today, I have two last items of business, and feel free to interrupt me, anybody, if there's anything else that I'm forgetting. First off, I do want to let you all know that I put a link in the chat to our formal workshop evaluation for this week of workshops. So please complete that evaluation. It's the information that we glean from those evaluations that give us the information we need to kind of evaluate the whole series at the end of this and think about what next year will look like. So this is what we use to identify possible new workshops for the coming year, and kind of gather some insight on how we did.